I Hate Politics is a podcast about a human activity we love to hate. I am Sunil Dasgupta. I have long wanted to do a show on the communication style of Montgomery County Public Schools, Maryland. But you can imagine MCPS wasn't going to talk, and those who interact regularly with the school district leadership did not want to jeopardize their relationships. The situation was a puzzle, really. Why would an institution full of teachers teaching my kids how to write, and doing it successfully, I might add, nevertheless write in such an inscrutable, ineffective, counterproductive manner, where letters from school to parents and guardians almost always left more questions than they answered? For the rest of the story, you went on the grapevine, filled in the blanks, and entertained conspiracy theories. Numerous people repeatedly, over several years, school boards and superintendents have pointed out MCPS's many communication failures. But no amount of complaint, it seems, works. The consequences are real. Right now, the boundary study communications are careening into uncontrollable, as it did in 2019 and 2020 when it last came up. The change MCPS made this time around was to bind parent participants in the process with NDAs. Muzzle your best ambassadors. You'll hear more about school boundaries in the coming months, but the latest upset over communications failure concerns the proposal to dissolve the Down County Consortium, a set of schools where families enjoyed some school choice, in order to build a new system of consortia countywide. More hilariously, last week, when the superintendent of schools in Montgomery County, Virginia, resigned or was forced out, the administrator of a local Facebook group in Montgomery County, Maryland, with 25,000 members, reported the news without noting the difference. In another Facebook group comprised mainly of teachers, there were similar questions asked as well. I understand people don't pay attention to local politics and local media is on the decline, but this level of ignorance about Montgomery County's highest paid employee is truly incredible. If the government closest to us is the best form of government, how can this be true? But MCPS was not interested in self-examination, and friends of MCPS did not want to strain their relationships. So we have waited for this for almost as long as the podcast has been around. A couple of weeks ago, Mike Ritchie, former spokesperson and director of communications when Larry Hogan was the governor of Maryland, wrote a Substack article about a letter he received from his kids' MCPS school, which of course left more questions than it answered. As a communications professional, before Hogan he worked in Congress for Speakers Paul Ryan and John Boehner, and now teaches crisis communications at Georgetown University, Mike decided to break it down. So I asked him if he will join the show. Stay with us.
I Hate Politics is brought to you by UMBC's Political Science Program, where you'll learn to shape public policy, impact communities, and function at the center of modern society. Learn more at shadygrove.umbc.edu.
I Hate Politics is a podcast about our neighborhoods, workplaces, schools and streets, and our local governments as they function in diverse and democratic societies. This means our politics are messy, dirty, sometimes corrupt, with often self-serving politicians. But no matter how much we may hate politics, we are never exempt from it, even when we refuse to participate. In fact, the purpose of politics is to keep society functioning, precisely when we don't agree with each other, like now. Music for this episode comes from Howard County, Maryland composer Anna Rubin, who used to teach music at UMBC. The compositions we use in this episode come from her album Povehi. Michal Schmidt on cello and fixed media, and spoken word from Maryland beekeepers, Carolyn and Jeff Crooks. The compositions simulate a backyard apiary. You can find Anna Rubin's work at annarubinmusic.com. Mike Ritchie, welcome to I Hate Politics.
Thank you for having me.
I have long despaired about communication from Montgomery County Public Schools, MCPS. You recently wrote a Substack using MCPS public communication and as an example of what not to do.
Yeah, we had a security incident. The elementary school my kids attend, it was an issue with a student that other parents had reported over the years. And the student he had written down names of students that he intended to harm. And you can imagine how jarring that is for parents. The school, the principal, issued a couple of notes about it. The first one was very pro forma, but you can understand at the beginning of an incident, you don't know a lot yet. That's pretty standard. But the one that I focused on in my piece, it was the Friday afternoon before spring break. And I saw this email pop up, Friday at 4:15 p.m. or something, right before spring break. They send them out in Google Docs, which is a whole other thing, which is weird to me. In real time, this is a true story. In real time, as I was reading the Google Doc, I could see an employee of the school system editing it in real time. So this email has already gone out to parents as an update, and it is still being edited in real time. It's just a lot of legalese about the code of conduct, about federal privacy law. It's one of those emails that even the least engaged parents will come away asking, more questions than answers about. Just said, we're doing what we can, and federal privacy law prevents us from saying more. I think for parents, it was a lose-lose situation. Parents who were engaged felt like it was insufficient, and parents like me who didn't understand it, suddenly I was interested. And over the next few days, over that ensuing spring break, there was a lot of despair among parents. They didn't feel like there was a sense of urgency on the part of the school. In any communication, especially in a situation like this where you are essentially serving a constituency, is to maintain trust. As a parent, I am sending in my case, an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old to you every day. And I trust that you are protecting them, that you're looking out for them. The most important thing in any communication like this is the tone. There's sort of an old cliche for this, which is people want to know that you care before they care about what you know. And so I want to know that you care and that this is, yes, personal for you. And I get it. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know much about how the school system does it, if they have like a general counsel set up. I see it every day in corporations, and I see it all the time. Lawyers take over the process. And because people are so afraid of saying anything that's sort of outside basic guardrails, you lose the authenticity.
Do you think MCPS is unsafe? Can a letter, however badly written, change that fact?
For me, no. I don't have that concern in our own area day to day. This situation, though, the one I've described, is still ongoing in a sense that they have really not fully closed the loop for parents on what they're going to do. What people want to hear in these situations is some form of, here's what we're doing to make sure this never happens again. And of course, no one can guarantee that something like this will never happen again. But they still want to hear it. They want to know that that is your priority, not we're going to do whatever we can in the situation to make sure you don't sue us and make sure that we go on to the next fire. Like, people want to hear, and that's what I have not heard yet. And so until I hear about this situation in general, we're going to make sure something like this never happens again. That to me leaves something like this as an open question.
If you are assured of safety in the school as a general principle, somebody might say that this is merely a letter. It's written for legal purposes. It is written to check boxes. Why does it matter if your child is safe?
We moved to this area. We picked this particular community because of this school system, this cluster, I think they call them. I'm not in the PTA. I don't go to school board meetings. I just want to trust that things are being handled day to day. I'm a big believer in quiet effectiveness. When all of a sudden I have to start questioning the emails I'm getting, it starts to raise doubt. It just makes you question everything.
Communication is that important that even if you can provide safety, it seems like you're lacking it.
There was an incident at the school where an ambulance was involved, and they rushed out a text message that was very vague. And it basically was like, everything's fine, but there's an ambulance. And we came to learn later that there was a health issue involving one of the staff members of the school, and everything turned out okay. But think about in that moment, I'm at work, parents are far flung all over the region, probably in the middle of the day. You get a text message like that. There's got to be a better way to do this where you're not, making people panic. And I know this has been an issue. I remember from when I was in government, there was an issue with a school shooting where people felt like there was I forget if it was in what part of the county it was
Magruder.
in. Right. And if I recall, you probably know better than I did, I think there was an issue that day with communications.
Sure. People
felt like they didn't. Again, I'm not saying communication should be the highest priority in an event like that. But I noticed that one of the big takeaways from that incident, and one of the things people talked about for a long time after, was the communication.
Let's break down the letter that you got.
First sentence was, I acknowledge and recognize there are ongoing concerns around safety, given my serious incident communication from Tuesday, April 8th, 2025. Here alone, you just really, even that is it's a very formal way to start a communication like that. Instead, I think you just want to, it would actually be better to just state facts like, over the last few days, we have received a number of messages of concern regarding this week's incident. And that works on two levels. Number one, for engaged parents, it makes them say, yeah, good, I was one of them. I'm glad you're acknowledging me. And then the second one is for people who are less engaged, it's like, wait, what is this about? What happened? Like, I don't understand what you're saying. So I think, but the problem is we've gotten into this, in the bureaucracy, you notice that people mostly just tell you things instead of showing you things. So it's like, I want to assure you instead of actually finding ways to reassure people. It's a lot of speaking at you as opposed to kind of connecting with you. And you really don't, it establishes, again, distance and disconnect from the reader, and you want to bring people close. But I want to read to you here the next sentence. And this is all one sentence. I'm going to be very clear about that. Please know that I, along with appropriate offices and MCPS, are following all required protocols and including disciplinary consequences as outlined in the MCPS Student Code of Conduct, many of which are protected under the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, FERPA, which prohibits disclosing specific student information. So that was all in one sentence, including the use of 3 acronyms. When I was in government, I always used to tell my team, our job is to simplify the complicated. And a sentence like that, which puts up all these brick walls in front of you, like this code of conduct and this privacy law, doesn't give people an entryway. The logic of what they're saying is sound, that they're doing what they can, but privacy laws prohibit them from saying more. But there's even still, there are ways to say that or to go about that are.
This tension between privacy and people's right to know is a long-standing problem in communication. Sure. What are the trade-offs?
Obviously, you can't violate the law. A situation like this, I obviously cannot speak to a student's status, but can I at least say the situation has been addressed and we will follow up? Even if the principal is basically put in the voice of saying, like, I wish I could tell you more, but I can't. There's nothing wrong with that. The postscript here is that, I think a lot of people were hoping that they would make school officials directly available for forums or opportunities to discuss this further. They sort of did that, but it was with a third party, a counselor who was hired by the school system. Parents were even more frustrated by that it was somebody who really wasn't involved in the situation at all, who was there to basically take down notes on their concerns. So my point is, how much can you do around it? How much can you kind of accessorize things? Even if you make it a two-way street, like the principal could say, I'm going to be here today till 7 o'clock. My office is open. Come in, let's talk about like something. There are ways to do it.
How much evidence needs to go to the public to make that letter believable?
This is definitely a trade-offs conversation because in the culture we live in, we think ahead to like the consequences and like what happens. So for instance, in this situation, if we had this as sort of a round table of 5 people, one person would inevitably say, yeah, but if you say it's an 8-year-old or you say it's a 3rd grader, then all the parents are going to start going on WhatsApp and emailing like, who is it? And starting to narrow it down. And so you go down this rabbit hole of
But they do it anyway.
Right. So that was exactly. They're going to do it anyway. Exactly. No matter how vague, the more vague you are, the more they're going to do it.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, sometimes I've seen issues surrounding use of racist language. And I can see why, especially the parents who might be involved wouldn't want even the grade to be identified because, you're starting to narrow it down. But I still think if you just lean in the direction of an age, maybe even a gender, but in these situations, you actually would find that the more facts you give, the less you would have to, on the front end, the more you would disarm people on the back end and not have to explain yourself as much. And I think that's the balance that facts and actions by far. Here's what happened. Here's what we're doing about it. The rest is basically state your values and your priorities. For less engaged parents, they don't really care about values statements. They care about, what happened? What are you doing about it? So things like that vague text message about an ambulance at the school, and it took hours to clarify, maybe not hours, but it took time to clarify that it didn't involve a student and that it was contained, I think, to the front office. Why is it a bad thing to just...
Ironically, the text messages was supposed to enable communication. The entire system of setting up the text message was supposed to inform parents about what's going on. Instead of informing parents, creates more anxiety. So there can be an argument to kill the text messaging system itself.
I'm sure that's been discussed. But I don't know, I would make an argument to just use it more. Thankfully, for some reason, our bus route's never affected by this. But I've seen emails go out, and I wonder like how many parents saw the email that their bus was late. If you're going to have it, you should use it, and you should use it well. One time, I think I saw it used because the emails were down.
The question is, how many channels do you want to open? And then how many fires do you have to tend? Rather than just, limiting what you're doing and doing it well. There must be a trade-off in terms of communication resources between those two.
There's a few ways through there. One is to do a survey of customer preferences. Great if you could automate it sometimes so that maybe the same thing you could do that too. There are probably guidelines for when principals are allowed to use the text message system. That's all stuff that can be, I don't know how they do this, but that's all stuff that could be reviewed. That's the stuff that I spent a lot of time on in state government.
MCPS cannot be the only bureaucracy to have these problems. Do you think there's a larger problem with our communication culture? Are you finding that communications in itself is somewhat problematic? Because a lot of the people that are working for MCPS are comm specialists.
I find that people wait until there's a critical mass of problems to communicate. It's so jarring sometimes. You talk about a problem and then you put out your regularly scheduled sort of happy pajama day newsletter that was scheduled to go out weeks ago, the next day. I believe we have a silo problem where, people are just focused on checking boxes and getting their communication out. So there's not one person necessarily looking at all of it holistically. In the governor's office, I had a grid basically of every day. There were days where I would say, nothing should go out today. This should be the focus today.
That kind of executive authority is missing very deliberately in an institution like MCPS.
Sure.
Because, they have these 207 local units, so to speak, in a centralized office, and they don't want that level of centralization.
Sometimes we lose sight of, because we're trying new things, we lose sight of the basics. Like, do you have an accessible website? Do your press conferences have captioning? Like I've seen like local agencies like, oh, we started a podcast, and it's like, but your website is stuck in, like, why don't you like get that stuff right first? Like put the time and energy into that and then start your podcast to brag about that. But don't, move on to the new, before you move on to all the next big thing. And I'm sure this will be what AI is for the next 5 years or so. You really want to get these basic things of how people interact with government.
Friday night news dump is a very broadly used method of letting people sit with bad news. Why do you think it's not a good idea?
In this case, it was before spring break, so I'm sure that was a big part of the impetus to get it out. Like we have to sit. I can picture these meetings. I'm sure there was a conference call. We have to say something. Got to say something before the weekend, or it's going to be worse. The reason for doing it would be, if you think about it the way one thing that I do think holds true to this day, we kind of have a week to week mentality. So if you can burn off an issue before the end of the week, or before, people will usually generally move on by Monday or Tuesday. So my version of a Friday, I was a big believer. If I had something I didn't love, like Thursdays, because then it gave everybody a day to sort of freak out about it, get it out of their system, and then it was filtered out.
Well, in that case, we have some good news, right? So MCPS does issue a Thursday night 5 things to do.
All right.
There's a great example of this kind of public communication, strategic communication, with now the challenge of putting through the boundary changes that MCPS is looking at. Probably, 2/3 of the county is going to be impacted. The controversy surrounding that is that there are resident participants in boundary study analysis presentations, other groups. And these participants are being asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement, NDA. So in effect, rather than have ambassadors for the boundary change you want, you are effectively building an army of leakers.
Yeah, you want people, to your point about ambassadors, you want people to feel like a part of something. Again, we talked about trust. And now, again, even if there's nothing, sinister going on, the NDA can be used now as a cudgel for people to question the legitimacy of the process. The way these things are worded, sometimes are very strongly worded, so that they might not allow for leaks. But it definitely doesn't. It's another thing where, I look back at my emails and in mid-March.
Mike, hold on a minute. If leaks were allowed, they wouldn't happen.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
leaks are by definition not allowed.
Of course. I'm sure there'll be somebody at that table who's like, oh, wow, it wouldn't have occurred to me in the first place to really say anything while we're in the process. But now, you've made it, you've given it kind of a different context. Boundary study is actually another great example. I mean, in mid-March, there were some emails. There's very technical subject lines. And then by like June, there was finally an email where the subject line said, like, does this impact your child? That's the place where you should start from. And even that email, it's like a long list of schools, takes like several steps to figure out whether you're affected. And look, if a school system person were here, they would rattle off for us the quantity, right? Like, oh, he sent out 34 things, to 2,000 people, and there was an open rate of. But that, that to me shouldn't be your barometer.
When Thomas Taylor took over as superintendent, he did promise better communications. It hasn't happened, to be honest. How have you experienced this over Taylor's year?
Well, I'm very familiar with the snow day video that he put out.
Yeah, that was the high point.
That was funny at the time, but then 3 days later, when we were all 3 years older, it probably wasn't as humorous. But that is a style of communications, executive, founder, CEO driven communications that has absolutely become more important. You think about someone like Randy Clark, who runs WMATA. He's very successful. He's a very good communicator. And I think one of the reasons is that he's just omnipresent, including on social media, which I'm sure is a burden in and of itself. But, when you have these good communicators, it's great when they film a video. It's great that they can glad hand with the grandees. But prepare for this. I was looking through his Twitter, superintendent's X feed, and over the last couple months, it's all just reposts except for a couple like pro forma things. And I think it's just a huge opportunity for them to really leverage his style and his commitment to communications by kind of, again, showing instead of telling, and just, maybe use the first, maybe have him do more sort of direct to camera short form videos that go up in real time. If you have to have somebody who kind of helps him do this as he goes, I mean, that's fine. But to me, that's a great way to flip this script. People really start to notice if he was like, oh, I'm, here at this situation, and videos are great. I'm sure he's very good at board meetings, but a lot of people, we just don't consume things that way. So I think that's a big opportunity for them to use him to raise the credibility and the trust in the school system.
What is the chance that we make every problem a communication problem rather than what it is underneath, which is schools have to run well?
Right. No, there's no question. You need a story what is the story you're telling? And I don't, he probably has in his mind, hopefully, a story that he's telling about where the school system is and where he wants it to go. What is the story you would tell in a 60-second video? Here's what we believe in. Here are the 3 things we need to do. And then, once you define that story, all the tactics you and I are talking about, those tactics are informed by what that story is. And that story does absolutely need to, to your point about him pledging better communications. That's great. Yeah. Like, that's what people want to hear. Like, we're going to do better. We're going to get, but, you have to follow through on that. And again, I think it buys you, and I said this in the piece, a lot of times you're just buying time to solve problems, especially in a crisis situation. If you put out something that, this is an evolving situation, but we're doing what we can. You can really buy time and trust. That's why I just feel strongly about communications, even with all the newfangled things that we're looking at, LinkedIn, newsletters, and podcasts. It really is just still straightforward emails, straightforward writing. If I was working for him, would be, what is the story you're trying to tell about this school system? And then how do we tell that story, and how do we keep people apprised of the milestones as we go? But obviously there are, many fires every day. My experience, especially working in state government, is that, especially the way our laws are set up in the state, these school systems can basically, a lot of times, be fiefdoms unto themselves and not really feel or be held accountable. And that's, I think, one of the lingering issues from the pandemic that a lot of parents, and I still hear from parents to this day who are outraged about when the schools reopened and how they reopened.
You had Randy Clark as an example, and he did turn a ship around. So you think that's a model for other public leaders to pursue?
The trade-off there is sometimes when you become so focused on your executive's communications, especially here in government, then you lose sight of the importance of your sort of official agency-based communications. And so you have to find a way to have it all work in concert. But I've seen a lot of situations coming up where you can tell there's a lot of energy on like the executive videos. It's all great. And then but underneath, there's less attention paid to stuff in the wiring. But yes, I think I'm a big believer in, you have to, you've got to have kind of a CEO mentality. And what people want nowadays is, that's why you see more employee town halls. That's why you see these things leaked more now to the media. People want these omnipresent leaders. Someone like Randy Clark, who shows that he gets down, he levels with people, but he gets down on there. He shows that he uses he uses the product. He immerses himself in it. He's knowledgeable in it. I think that is a good model.
Mike Ritchie, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
That's former Director of Communications for Governor Larry Hogan in Maryland and U.S. House of Representatives Speakers Paul Ryan and John Boehner, Michael Ritchie, putting on his professional hat as a communications expert to look at the problems of the school district where he lives and sends his children to public school. That's all for this episode of I Hate Politics, where we aim to stem the decline in local news by working with community voices. Don't forget to tune in to our Tuesday morning news analysis. I Hate Politics is produced by me, Sunil Dasgupta, with support from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I direct UMBC's political science program at the universities of Shady Grove in Montgomery County, where, among other things, we explore and learn about politics, government, and society close to home. Music for this episode comes from Howard County, Maryland composer Anna Rubin, who used to teach music at UMBC. The compositions we use in this episode come from her album Povehi. Michal Schmidt on cello and fixed media, and spoken word from Maryland beekeepers, Carolyn and Jeff Crooks. The compositions simulate a backyard apiary. You can find Anna Rubin's work at annarubinmusic.com. If you want to share your music on the show or know someone else who might want to, please email us at producer@ihppod.org. I hope you'll subscribe and share the podcast as we bring you stories about politics close to you and to your home. See you next time.
Oh, the mysteries of how the destinies of humans and honeybees are woven together.